Windsor Castle, with its sweeping views of the English countryside, and its halls echoing with centuries of royal history, stood still that night. Behind its towering stone walls, beneath the golden chandeliers and the age-old tapestries that told stories of power and majesty, a storm of emotions was brewing, a storm that would shake the monarchy to its very core. This was not just another crisis in the long and storied history of the British royal family. This was a confrontation of the highest order, a clash between tradition and modernity, between the cold, immutable duties of the crown and the human desires that inevitably arise even in the highest echelons of power. It was the moment when the king's patience, tested for years, finally snapped. The storm was not one that Charles had anticipated, nor one that his consort, Camilla, could have foreseen when she began to carve her own place in the monarchy. In what was perhaps the most dramatic and unexpected moment of the reign, Charles, King of the United Kingdom, demanded that his queen consort, Camilla, leave the palace. What was meant to be a night of royal duties, filled with meetings and engagements, instead became one of the most significant, and, for some, devastating events of the modern monarchy. It was a time of transition. Charles had assumed the throne just months earlier, following the passing of his beloved mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The weight of the crown was not only a symbol of continuity, but also a reminder of the profound changes that came with it. As Prince of Wales, Charles had been accustomed to the relative freedom that his role afforded, a role that allowed him to pursue his passions, lead causes close to his heart, and maintain a level of privacy within the rigid framework of British royal life. But as king, his responsibilities became all-encompassing. He had spent decades preparing for this moment, learning every nuance of statecraft, every protocol, and every tradition that came with the position. The pressure was immense. Every gesture, every word, every public appearance now carried the weight of the centuries-old monarchy. In this context, Camilla, once a figure in the background, began to evolve in ways that unsettled her husband. She had been a fixture at his side for years, but now, as queen consort, she was expected to play a far more prominent and complex role. To some, she had been an ideal partner, someone who stood with Charles through thick and thin, facing public condemnation and media scorn in the early days of their relationship. Yet now, in the aftermath of Charles's ascension, there was a palpable tension between their roles, as she began to seek a greater sense of independence. It was here, in the intimate corridors of the palace, that the seeds of discontent began to sprout. Camilla's actions, which at first appeared subtle, speaking more freely, making independent appearances, and attending events without seeking prior approval from royal aides, began to grow more pronounced. She seemed to be stepping further into the limelight, increasingly willing to carve her own space within the royal family. Some saw it as a breath of fresh air, a necessary step for the monarchy to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. But to Charles, it represented a break with the long-established traditions that had been the foundation of the crown for centuries. The situation came to a head one evening, when Charles discovered that Camilla had given an interview without the palace's approval. It wasn't just the interview itself that angered him, but the content. She had spoken candidly about the future of the monarchy, her role in it, and her vision for a more modern royal family, one that was less beholden to rigid protocol and more responsive to the evolving expectations of the public. For Charles, who had spent his life upholding the sanctity and dignity of the monarchy, this was nothing short of heresy. He had never been one to embrace the spotlight, preferring the steady, unwavering duty of the crown. To see his queen consort speaking so openly about her thoughts on royal reform, with little regard for the deeply ingrained practices that had served the monarchy for centuries, struck at the heart of everything he had known and believed about his role. That night, in a private study within the royal quarters, the confrontation unfolded. It was a confrontation unlike any the monarchy had seen before, a rupture that would become a pivotal moment in the history of the British royal family. The room was vast, adorned with intricate tapestries depicting the royal family's illustrious past, yet tonight, the space felt small and suffocating. Staff members, who had been in the royal service for decades, whispered in hushed tones as they stood outside the door, sensing the palpable tension that radiated from within. Charles's voice, usually calm and composed, was now sharp with anger. He was standing, his hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed with fury. "Camilla, how could you do this?" he demanded, his voice rising in frustration. "How could you betray everything we stand for? The monarchy is not some modern PR machine, where you get to speak your mind without consequence." Camilla, though taken aback, stood her ground. The fire in her eyes mirrored the passion that had long defined her role as the unsung hero of the monarchy. She had borne the weight of public scorn for years, standing silently in the shadows of a prince who was not yet king, waiting for the day when she could finally step into the role she had earned. Now, she was no longer willing to be silenced. "I have a voice, Charles," she replied, her tone firm yet tinged with sorrow. "I have fought for this family, for this crown, and for you. But I will not be muzzled. I am queen consort, and I have every right to speak." But her words only seemed to deepen Charles's rage. It was not just the words themselves that hurt him, but the very idea that his queen consort could, in his view, take such liberties with the sacred institution he had vowed to protect. For him, her desire for independence felt like an affront to the monarchy's values and traditions, values that had been passed down through the generations. And then, in an unprecedented moment of fury, Charles made a demand that stunned both Camilla and the witnesses present. "Return the ring," he said. The ring was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It was the same ring that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, a piece of royal history with an emotional and symbolic weight that could never be underestimated. It was a gift from Charles, a symbol of his enduring love for Camilla, and a gesture that sealed their union despite decades of public scrutiny. For Camilla, it had come to represent the strength of their bond, forged over years of hardship and misunderstanding. But now, the king's demand to return it felt like a profound betrayal. It was as if he was severing the very foundation of their love, cutting the last visible thread between them. The act of asking for the ring back was not just about a piece of jewelry. It was about a repudiation of everything they had overcome to get to this point. Without a word, Camilla slowly removed the ring from her finger. The room, which had been filled with the king's fury, now seemed to hold its breath. Camilla's fingers trembled slightly as she placed the ring on the table, an antique mahogany surface that had witnessed countless royal decisions over the centuries. The gesture, simple yet deeply symbolic, was one of heartbreak and dignity. The queen consort did not protest. She did not beg or argue. Instead, with her composure intact, she quietly instructed her staff to pack her belongings. There was no drama, no outburst. She simply left. The corridors of Windsor Castle, which had once echoed with the sounds of royal life, with laughter, conversation, and the rustle of fine gowns, now fell eerily silent. Staff members, who had long admired Camilla's grace under pressure, stood in stunned silence as they witnessed her departure. Some fought back tears, knowing that this was not just the end of a marriage, but the unraveling of a once strong partnership. At the stroke of midnight, Camilla was gone. A royal vehicle, escorted by security, silently sped away from the gates of Windsor, Camilla's silhouette framed by the dim glow of streetlights. She was leaving not just the palace, but the life she had built there, seeking refuge in the quiet countryside of Ray Mill House. The following morning, the royal family was rocked by the events of the previous night. Senior advisors were immediately called into emergency meetings, tasked with handling the fallout. Questions were raised about the impact on the royal brand and the potential damage to public perception. Would Camilla's absence create a gap in royal duties that the palace would have to quickly fill? And how could they present this split to the public without undermining the credibility of the monarchy? Meanwhile, Prince William and Princess Catherine were informed of the crisis. Though their support for Charles was unwavering, they could not help but feel the gravity of the situation. William, especially, was concerned for his father's well-being. He had seen the toll the throne had taken on Charles, but now, with this new fracture in his personal life, would he be able to withstand the pressures of ruling? As the weeks went on, the ramifications of the royal conflict became even clearer. Questions swirled about whether Charles and Camilla could ever reconcile, and if not, what would this mean for the future of the monarchy? Could the crown survive such a public rupture? At the same time, royal charities and patronages, many of which had relied on both Charles and Camilla for their success, found themselves struggling. Events were postponed, and staff members worked around the clock to shift schedules and mitigate the damage. The royal family's modernization efforts, which had seen Camilla take a more prominent role in the public eye, were now thrown into disarray. And yet, through all of this, one truth remained clear: the monarchy was more than just a family. It was an institution, steeped in centuries of history and tradition, and its survival would depend on how well it could weather the storm, just as it always had. As the dust settled, the question remained: what comes next for King Charles and Queen Camilla? The events of that fateful night had forever altered the course of their relationship, but whether this marked the end of their shared journey or simply a painful chapter that they could eventually overcome remained to be seen. To follow this ongoing saga and witness the next twists in this royal drama, be sure to subscribe for the latest updates. The crown's journey is far from over, and there's much more to be revealed in this ever-evolving tale of love, duty, and royal secrets.